Imagine standing at the head of 100 soldiers, the sound of their boots pounding the ground in perfect unison. You're not just a soldier. You're their leader, their guide, and their judge. But what did it truly take to earn that position? And how did life as a Roman centurion differ from the common soldiers who followed your orders? Stay tuned to uncover the grueling daily routine, unexpected challenges, and surprising perks of one of Rome's most respected and most dangerous roles. Becoming a centurion wasn't about your family name or where you grew up. It all boiled down to what you could prove in the thick of battle. Imagine being a soldier in the Roman army. Brutal, hand-to-hand combat, harsh marches across frozen wastelands or scorching deserts, and the constant chance of taking an enemy blade to the gut. It wasn't just about surviving, though. Being noticed, earning your shot at the coveted rank of Centurion required a relentless drive to outmatch everyone around you. From your peers to your superiors, every pair of eyes was sizing you up. You see, centurions were chosen for very specific qualities: loyalty, strength, intelligence, and perhaps most importantly, leadership. The Roman legions were all about discipline, and centurions were the glue holding the system together. They couldn't just fight like lions, they had to make others fight like lions too. That meant knowing when to bark orders, when to give a rallying speech, and when to march shoulder to shoulder with their men. Unlike many ancient societies where leadership roles were passed down to the wealthy or well-connected, the Roman army cared about results. If you were strong enough to hold the line and smart enough to adapt under pressure, you had a chance, provided you lived long enough to prove it.
But let's not pretend this was some orderly audition process. Making a name for yourself in the Roman army often involved risk-taking on the battlefield that would make most people hesitate. You couldn't just fight well, you had to stand out. Charging head-first into enemy lines, defending a vulnerable outpost despite overwhelming odds, breaking through enemy defenses when others were faltering. Such acts could mark you as more than just another soldier. Every skirmish was like an interview, where failing to impress didn't just mean rejection, it could mean a very permanent exit from the running. Even so, brute strength wasn't the only thing the officers looked for. A centurion's role wasn't just to swing a sword, it was to lead. That meant inspiring confidence, sometimes in the worst possible conditions. Imagine being a soldier surrounded by the chaos of battle, arrows raining down overhead, and hearing the steady voice of a centurion shouting commands, cutting through the panic. Those who rose to become centurions had to be the kind of men who could take a scattered group of terrified soldiers and turn them into a unified wall of shields, charging forward without hesitation. Julius Caesar himself was known for recognizing potential in his centurions. Unlike some commanders who simply let the system choose for them, Caesar promoted men based on their merit and their deeds on the battlefield. He wanted leaders who shared his vision, who could carry out his famously aggressive strategies without breaking morale. Centurions were an extension of his command. In fact, during his Gallic Wars, Caesar carefully documented the actions of his centurions, highlighting their bravery and tactics to inspire his troops. For Caesar, these men weren't just officers. They were the backbone of the legions. Now, if you've ever seen a depiction of a centurion, you've probably noticed one very distinct detail: the vine staff. This wasn't just a fancy accessory, it was a direct symbol of the centurion's authority. The staff wasn't ceremonial either. It was used very practically to discipline soldiers who stepped out of line. It represented the dual responsibility of the Centurion, the power to command and the duty to maintain order. Soldiers knew what that staff meant. Respect it, and you'd have a leader who'd guide you through the darkest days of war. Disobey it, and you'd better brace yourself, because leniency wasn't part of the job description.
But respect didn't always come easily. Centurions walked a fine line. They were admired for their skill and dedication, but also feared. After all, they weren't just leaders, they were enforcers. Earning the loyalty of your men wasn't just about keeping them alive or winning battles. It was about showing them that you were as committed to Rome's success as they were. Centurions didn't live separate, comfortable lives behind the battle lines. They fought, marched, and suffered alongside their soldiers, proving every day that their promotion was no fluke. This combination of respect and fear made the Centurions' rank one of the most unique in the Roman system. They weren't untouchable figures commanding from atop a hill. They were flesh and blood, taken from the same ranks as their men, but forged into something greater. Every insult endured, every injury survived, and every challenge overcome added to their credibility as leaders. And once they held that rank, they carried the weight of its responsibilities like the armor on their shoulders.
Think for a moment about what it took to get there. Years of battle, playing a cruel lottery where each fight could be your last. Proving not only your strength, but your intelligence and resilience. And then, after all of that, accepting the burden of leading others, knowing that if you failed, it was on your shoulders. The role of a centurion wasn't just earned, it was carved out over time, with sweat, blood, and sheer willpower. But earning this hard-fought position was only the beginning. Once you made it to the rank of Centurion, life didn't suddenly get easy. In fact, it grew even more demanding, with men depending on your decisions and the weight of discipline falling squarely on your shoulders. There were no breaks. So what exactly did a centurion's daily grind look like? Let's step into their worn sandals and find out. Congratulations! You've just woken up in a Roman military camp. The sun is rising, but you've probably been up well before dawn. Around you, soldiers are already at work, inspecting gear, sharpening weapons, even rehearsing battle formations. Actions that are loud, relentless, and completely waiting on your direction. As a centurion, you're the one they turn to, the one whose orders set the tone, and whose decisions might not decide whether they eat breakfast, as much as if they eat at all tomorrow. Their trust in you is both absolute and terrifying. To understand what this all means, think about the difference between you and the soldiers you're commanding. For them, life is hard enough. Endless drills, days spent preparing until real fights call. Under threat, cool failing. Was it worth it? All the scars, the sleepless nights, the constant feeling that one wrong command might end everything. But what if all that danger came with the kind of paycheck that could change your life? Because that's exactly what it meant to be
a centurion. They didn't just carry more responsibility, they were paid for it handsomely. In fact, their salary was at least 15 times higher than that of a standard soldier. Some sources suggest it could even climb to 60 times more. Imagine the envy that stirred among the rank-and-file legionaries. While most soldiers scraped by with basic rations and the bare minimum for survival, centurions had something altogether different. Options. This massive pay difference didn't just make a centurion wealthier than the men he led, it catapulted him into an entirely different social class. With that kind of income, a centurion could afford luxuries that regular soldiers could barely dream about. Gone were the days of standard-issue tunics and shared rations in the mess hall. Centurions could buy fine clothing, feast on better food, and maybe even enjoy a proper bed instead of a dusty corner of the barracks. For the soldiers, it must have seemed like their officers lived on another plane of existence, yet for the centurions themselves, this wealth was more than just comfort. It was proof that they'd made it, that their sacrifices hadn't been for nothing.
But this wealth wasn't just about better meals or silkier robes. It came with power. A centurion's income opened up opportunities that could reshape their entire future. Many used their earnings to invest in land, turning themselves into property owners and influential figures in their communities. This wasn't just a wise retirement plan, it was a statement. Owning land in the Roman world meant more than financial security. It meant status. It's no surprise that centurions often became pillars of local society after their military service, wielding authority not just on the battlefield, but in the civilian world too. Of course, the money didn't just roll in every month. A centurion's salary was supplemented by other sources. Spoils of war, for example, could make or break fortunes, depending on the campaign. After a tough victory, centurions might walk away with a hefty bonus, courtesy of looted treasures or battlefield rewards. On top of that, they were exempt from certain menial duties that would eat up the time and energy of their soldiers. No ditch digging or weapon hauling for a centurion. Their focus was on strategy and leadership, and their rank ensured that they lived in a very different world from the men they commanded. But here's the catch. All of that wealth and privilege came with a darker side. Being worth 15 or 60 times more than a regular soldier didn't make you immortal. Every battle was a roll of the dice, and every charge you led could be your last. It was a strange balance. On one hand, you could enjoy fine dining and influence local politics. On the other, you lived with the constant knowledge that wealth couldn't buy you invincibility. Every coin in a centurion's purse came with blood stains, not just the blood of enemies or soldiers, but potentially their own. Losing it all wasn't a figure of speech for them, it was a daily possibility. And the pressures didn't stop there. Even with all their wealth, centurions weren't untouchable. To hold their position, they needed to inspire loyalty in their men while keeping their commanders satisfied. This wasn't a role for someone who hoped to just coast along. Fail to motivate your soldiers, and you risked rebellion. Fail to perform in battle, and there could be consequences far worse than a pay cut. A centurion danced that fragile line of respect and fear among both their men and their superiors, and the stakes were always sky high. Still, for those who succeeded, the rewards spoke for themselves. Picture this. War is over, and you've survived. You've saved your pay for years, maybe decades. Now you're not a soldier anymore. You're a landowner, maybe even a budding politician. That same vine staff you wielded on the battlefield to maintain authority, symbolically it's still with you, but now it's used to command attention in local councils or to manage sprawling properties. In the Roman system, position and money were everything, and centurions were in prime position to climb the societal ladder once the fighting stopped. Yet for all this success, one question remains. What if you made it to the top, but couldn't hold on? Wealth and glory could disappear as quickly as they came, especially for centurions who fell out of favor or struggled to meet the constant demands of their rank. For some, the rewards were fleeting, and the fall from grace was brutal. And yet that didn't stop men from risking everything for the chance to wear that rank, to wield that power, to reap those rewards. Because even with the odds stacked against them, the idea of a life transformed through the riches and respect of being a centurion was enough to keep them fighting. But what happened to those who couldn't maintain that balance? Centurions might have embodied discipline, strength, and ambition, but failure or disloyalty always hung over them. The Roman military had little patience for weakness, and not every centurion managed to sit comfortably atop their hard-earned pedestal. When things went wrong, whether on the battlefield or inside the ranks, the consequences were swift and sometimes fatal. Let's look next at what they faced when discipline broke down, or when the unbearable weight of command became too much.
Being a centurion wasn't all glory and gilded rewards. It came with a brutal reality. You weren't just leading your men, you were controlling them, often with terrifying consequences. The Roman army didn't operate on casual suggestions or general goodwill. Order was enforced, and you, as a centurion, were the enforcer. Discipline wasn't optional. It was survival, not just for the legion, but for you personally. And discipline in this world was harsh. One of your key tools was the infamous vine staff. Not just a symbol of your authority, but a weapon for keeping your soldiers in line. Flogging was common and public. The sharp crack of the vine staff on the back of a disobedient soldier served as both punishment and warning to everyone else. There are stories of centurions who became notorious for their severity. One, nicknamed "Give Me Another," gained his grim title from his habit of breaking his staff during a beating, then barely pausing to demand a replacement so he could continue. The image is ruthless, and it's not hard to imagine the simmering resentment it created among the ranks. In fact, his legendary violence didn't end well. He and centurions like him were reportedly killed in mutinies by their own soldiers, proving that even absolute authority has its limits.
But harsh discipline wasn't just about punishment for the sake of control. It was seen as a necessity to sculpt raw recruits into an efficient fighting machine. You couldn't afford to let small infractions slide, not when those small cracks could spread into complete collapse. Cowardice, abandoning the line, or failing to follow orders could doom the entire unit. And so, punishment became extreme. In rare but infamous cases, dereliction of duty would lead to decimation, a chilling practice where 1 in every 10 soldiers in a guilty unit was executed, chosen randomly, usually by their own comrades. As a centurion, it might fall to you to oversee this, ensuring that the remaining soldiers understood the price of failure. It wasn't cruelty for cruelty's sake. It was how the Romans maintained their legendary discipline and fearsome reputation.
Of course, this relentless focus on order wasn't one-sided. The stakes were just as high for you as they were for the men you commanded. A losing battle, a failure to maintain the cohesion of your unit, or an outright mutiny could spell the end of your career and often your life. Many Centurions fought in the first ranks, not just because they were the strongest or most skilled fighters, but because leading from the front was the only way to earn unquestioned respect from your soldiers. To back away from the fight, to hide safely in the rear, no Vine's staff could save you from the consequences of that kind of cowardice. Your men respected bravery, and if you failed to show it, they wouldn't just lose their faith in you. They might find a way to remove you from command entirely, whether through accidents in battle or outright rebellion.
This constant pressure placed Centurions in a precarious position. On one side, there were your soldiers, who you needed to maintain loyalty and morale. On the other, your commanders, who expected victories, flawless cohesion, and legions of obedient men ready to storm into almost certain death at a moment's notice. You were caught between competing demands, any of which could get you killed if you slipped up. Failed to keep your men in line, and it was your leadership that would be called into question. Failed to satisfy your superiors, and punishment could follow, stripping you not just of your rank, but of your entire reputation. And if the punishment didn't break you, the shame surely would. But commanding men wasn't just about intimidation and punishment. It was about presence, visibility. Everything about a Centurion was designed to stand out, from the distinct crest rising sideways on your helmet to the deliberate way you carried yourself in battle. The enemy would spot you in an instant, but so would your own men. A Centurion wasn't just a leader. He was a walking symbol of order and confidence. They watched every word you said, every move you made. Your authority was both practical and psychological, creating the discipline that kept Rome's military unbeatable for centuries. Still, there was no escaping the line between respect and fear. And a Centurion's career often came down to walking that line perfectly or being destroyed by it. Push too hard and your soldiers might turn against you. Show too much leniency and you risked chaos. The Roman army didn't tolerate weakness, and the Centurion was expected to be the very opposite of weak in every way imaginable. But sometimes, despite your best efforts, everything slipped. Mutinies, although rare, happened. Roman history is riddled with examples of unrest breaking out, where Centurions were often the first to fall victim to their soldiers' frustrations. They were the immediate representation of authority, the face of everything the soldiers hated when conditions became too miserable, food too scarce, or orders too unreasonable. Being the enforcer meant taking the heat when tempers boiled over. Yet, for all the peril, many thrived in this role. Those who could maintain loyalty while upholding strict discipline didn't just survive. They became legends within their legions, respected by their men and prized by their commanders. It was a balancing act that tested both character and willpower. The rewards were tremendous.
But the cost of failure meant more than humiliation. It could mean your life. So, what happened next when centurions made it through years in this role? When they did everything right or enough to survive the wrong? Many grizzled leaders traded the chaos of army life for something entirely different. But retirement wasn't always a clean break from the military life they knew. Let's take a look at what awaited them after the fighting stopped. After decades of service, decades spent fighting on the front lines, disciplining men, and pushing through impossible odds, what exactly happened when a Roman centurion retired? For many, the answer was a well-earned transformation. Retirement wasn't just a quiet exit. It was a new version of the Roman rewards system, tailored for men who had given decades of their lives to the empire. If you were lucky enough to leave the army alive and with your record intact, the rewards waiting for you were more than worth the sacrifice. When your time in the army was officially over, the Roman state didn't just pat you on the back and send you packing. Veterans were granted what was known as honesta missio, an honorable discharge that served as proof they had completed their service obligations. This wasn't just an official farewell, it unlocked tangible benefits. For one, you and your family gained full Roman citizenship, including legal rights, the ability to vote, and exemption from taxes. Citizenship was no small thing in Rome. It marked you as part of the empire's inner circle, someone who had a claim to its wealth, protection, and privileges. And it wasn't just for you. Your parents, children, and even your spouse could reap those benefits, a rare level of security in a world where survival often depended on connections.
Then, there was the financial windfall waiting at the end of your service. Centurions left the military with either a sizable cash payout or, more commonly, a grant of land. Land wasn't just a practical gift, it was deeply symbolic in Rome. Owning even small plots meant independence, status, and a place in your local community. Many retired centurions found themselves living comfortably on estates that dwarfed anything they could have imagined before their time in the army. These land grants weren't random either. The Roman state deliberately placed veterans in strategically chosen settlements called veteran colonies. These colonies were often in border regions designed to strengthen Roman influence in far-flung territories, while also ensuring the loyalty of those who lived there. Retired soldiers didn't simply disappear into village life. Many stayed connected within their new communities by leaning on the skills they had developed during their military careers. In these colonies, retired centurions took up positions of authority. They became town councilors, officials, or organizers of local efforts like farming and infrastructure. Their experience leading men and maintaining discipline carried over seamlessly into civilian life. If there was a dispute over resources, someone needed a strategy for a tough harvest, or even a small crisis hit the area. Guess who knew how to rally people into action? You. Or rather, the centurion in you.
But even with all the perks of retirement, the transition wasn't simple. Imagine spending 20 or more years in the legions, living under strict schedules, enduring hardships every day, and constantly knowing any mistake on your part could cost lives. Then suddenly, you're handed a deed to some farmland and told, relax, enjoy your life. That shift wasn't easy. Many centurions struggled to adapt from military life to farming or civilian governance. The quiet rhythms of civilian work
couldn't replace the pulse of the battlefield. And yet, the Roman system accounted for this in a subtle way. Community. In veteran colonies, you weren't alone. These settlements were filled with other retired soldiers, men who had braved the same horrors, shared the same victories, and knew what it meant to lead and sacrifice. Together, they formed communities that mirrored the structure and support systems of the legions, making the adjustment to retirement far smoother. It wasn't uncommon for retired centurions to be viewed as living symbols of Rome's strength and success. In their towns, they were seen as protectors and elders, often regarded with a mixture of awe and deference. Children might grow up hearing stories of their exploits. Neighbors sought their advice. And when it came to reinforcing the values of the empire, discipline, loyalty, and hard work, who better than you, the person who embodied them for decades? Their legacy wasn't just about warfare. It seeped into the very fabric of Roman life, from the fields they worked to the laws they upheld.
Veteran colonies themselves became essential to both the Roman military system and the empire's expansion. Strategically positioned along borders or in newly conquered lands, these communities served a dual purpose. They provided homes for retired troops, while also acting as buffers against external threats. In these regions, veteran settlers were the first line of defense, a fact that ensured the military mentality never faded completely. The colonies didn't just shelter veterans, they became hubs of Roman influence, ensuring that the culture of discipline and loyalty the legions instilled lived on for generations. And yet, what really set retired centurions apart was how they were remembered. These weren't just seasoned veterans fading into obscurity. Many were remembered as heroes, legends even. They stood as a bridge between the military and civilian life, proof that service to Rome could lead not only to wealth and stability, but to deep respect within the society they had secured. You weren't just someone who had survived a dangerous job. You were a builder, a protector. Centurions didn't just retire. They became living monuments to all the power and possibility Rome represented. This was the ultimate payoff. You didn't just fight for survival. You helped forge an empire. And when your fighting days ended, you stepped out into a world that still relied on you to lead, to build, and to inspire. For retiring centurions, life may have slowed down, but their legacy never did.
A centurion's life was a constant tightrope walk, a blend of glory, danger, and sacrifice that shaped the Roman Empire at its core. From leading deadly charges into enemy lines to holding collapsing fronts, they embodied the discipline and ambition that kept the legions unstoppable. Yet, beyond the battlefield, they were far more than soldiers. They settled disputes, upheld Roman law, and became vital organizers in the provinces. As one historian put it, "There I say no other single job was as important for the functioning of the Roman state as that of the centurion." So, how about you? Could you handle it? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe.